This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for September 11th through the 17th. On this week's show, we discuss how music was affected by the events of 9/11. We also talk about the first MTV Video Music Awards and an accidentally seductive performance of the ages. And we celebrate a date that had a lot happen on it. This first story comes with a disclaimer. This is a music history podcast where we go deeper into events that briefly get touched upon on my daily Music History Today podcast, found here every day, including the weekends, actually. Please like, subscribe, etc., like everybody else tells you. Anyway, this first event did have some effects on music, and we will mention those effects in detail. However, we are going to spend more than the average amount of time that we would normally do on the event itself and that particular week because the events of that week warrant it. We will, for one sentence only, say something about politics. Otherwise, we will not delve into the political ramifications of the event, but mainly the musical ones. We will briefly debunk a major conspiracy theory surrounding it, and as you will find out later, this event is also personal and also involves death and a lot of it. Some of you may be triggered over it. I know that I still do whenever I have to go into a tall building or watch footage on television. Therefore, listener and viewer discretion is advised. Also, for you video watchers out there, we are not going to show anything from the events of that day or even the aftermath. Sorry. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's begin. On September 7th, 2001, Michael Jackson held the first of his two 30th anniversary star-studded tribute concerts at Madison Square Garden in New York City. That same day, singer Ryan Adams recorded a music video for his song, New York, New York. In the video, Ryan stood on the Brooklyn side of the East River at Brooklyn Bridge Park with the skyline of Lower Manhattan behind him. Among the buildings of the skyline were the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. On September 10th, 2001, while testifying in front of Congress about $3.2 trillion in missing defense money, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld called the Pentagon bureaucracy the biggest threat to America. Rumsfeld was in the middle of his 7th month as Defense Secretary in the new George W. Bush presidential administration. On the evening of September 10, 2001, Michael Jackson performed the second of those tribute concerts at the Garden. Meanwhile, on September 10, 2001, yours truly, who has lived in New York City since 1996, went to the Borders Books and Music at the World Trade Center after work to buy something. The World Trade Center complex, much like it does today, had a mall. I guarantee you that none of us figured that our next day would be rather life-changing. It occurred to me the other day that there is now a complete generation that has graduated high school and college and has been in the workforce for at least a few years out of college who weren't even born when the events of September 11th happened and have about as much attachment to the events that took place that week as most of Generation X have to November 22nd, 1963, and President John F. Kennedy Jr.'s assassination. In fact, unless you were born before 1990, you probably vaguely remember watching what happened in a school classroom. Also, in order to understand the reaction, you have to remember the times. Therefore, a quick history lesson on the events of the day and also that particular week, because while the events of September 11th have been covered in numerous documentaries, the aftermath tends not to be, especially one event that put the fear of God into everybody in New York City and Washington, D.C. The morning of Tuesday, September 11th started out as a pretty, relatively warm, sunny day in New York City and Washington, D.C. Basketball icon Michael Jordan announced that morning via fax to the media that he was coming out of retirement to play for the Washington Wizards. What's a fax? Well, a fax is you know what, just Google it, kids, and get off my lawn while you're at it. Anyway. In New York City, it was election primary day for the local city elections, including one for mayor. Due to term limits, then Mayor Rudy Giuliani wouldn't run and couldn't run again. In retrospect, probably a good thing. Anyway, musically, there were new album releases that day from Jay-Z, Mariah Carey, and Bob Dylan. Singer, actor, and writer Seth MacFarlane of Family Guy fame and rapper and actor Marky Mark Wahlberg were both scheduled to be on early morning flights out of Boston, Massachusetts, both of them going to Los Angeles that morning. Both of them missed those flights, one due to a changed meeting and one apparently due to a hangover. Those flights, both Boeing 767s leaving Boston Logan International Airport, were the two planes that went into the World Trade Center. The first one, American Airlines Flight 11, left Boston at 7:49 a.m. and hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m., taking out the 93rd through 99th floors. Then, United Airlines Flight 175 left Boston at 8:14 a.m. and hit the South Tower at 9:03 a.m., taking out the 77th through the 85th floors. American Airlines Flight 77 was a Boeing 757 that left Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. at 8:20 a.m. on its way to Los Angeles. Instead, it ended up hitting the west wall of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. at 9:37 a.m. United Airlines Flight 93 was a Boeing 757 that left Newark International Airport in Newark, New Jersey at 8:42 a.m. on its way to San Francisco. According to interviews conducted with two men who had organized this whole event, that plane was on its way to attack the United States Capitol building. By the time that plane was on its way to the Capitol, the passengers had received phone calls from their families as the other planes had hit their targets. Passengers rushed the cockpit where the hijackers were to try to get control of the plane back. The plane ended up going down in a field in Stony Creek Township near Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 10:03 a.m. Everyone was lost on that plane. 4 minutes before Flight 93 crashed into the field, at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center had massive structural failure from the superheated jet fuel and did a pancake implosion, with one floor coming down on top of each other, each one sounding like, bombs going off from the impact of tons of concrete slamming down onto each other. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower did the same thing. Debris from that collapse struck and destroyed the attached Marriott Hotel, along with the nearby 47-story 7 World Trade Center building. That building burned for another 7 hours before collapsing at 5:21 p.m. Both the Marriott and 7 World Trade Center tend to be forgotten about during the telling of 9/11. By the time the morning had ended, 4 airplanes were hijacked and crashed in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, and almost 3,000 people lost their lives. Among those people who were killed that day was jazz singer Betty Farmer, who was in one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Planes were grounded at 9:42 a.m. once the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, realized what was really going on. Subway service in New York City was completely shut down until about 2:30 in the afternoon that day. Bridges and tunnels coming into New York were completely shut down. Musically on that day, aside from the albums that came out, MTV and VH1 stopped playing music videos and instead played news reports from CBS News. Radio stations stopped playing music for the first time in decades and simulcasted newscasts. The Latin Grammy Awards, which were scheduled that day, were canceled. Sting, who was beginning an internet live stream when the attacks happened, only played one song, his song Fragile, and then he cut the stream. Paul McCartney, who was flying out of New York City from JFK Airport for London, England, sat on the tarmac watching the World Trade Center burning as his and all plane traffic was grounded for a few days. Later that afternoon, members of Congress went onto the United States Capitol building steps and sang God Bless America. After the events of that day, the new century would be marked in the human consciousness as before 9/11 and after 9/11. There was another event the very next week that's kind of been lost in the annals of history that led to heightened fears among people, especially in New York City and Washington, D.C. On September 18th, the anthrax terror campaign started as letters were mailed containing the deadly chemical to various news organizations in New York City and Washington, D.C., and also to Congress people. 22 people came in contact with anthrax. 5 died as a result, including postal employees who handled the letters. The attacks made people afraid to touch their own mail. People thought that America was under attack again, leading to even more fear and nervousness. For years, the person who the FBI said was the prime suspect was bioweapons expert Stephen Hatfill. However, after finally being exonerated in 2005, the FBI turned their attention to scientist and new chief suspect Bruce Edwards Ivins. Ivins passed away in 2007. The FBI named Ivins as the main suspect in 2008 and closed the case officially in 2010. All of these attacks added to the mounting paranoia in the country in the fall of 2001. In fact, things got so crazy that the group Anthrax had to put out a statement saying that they were not going to change their name, even though people really wanted them to. Now that you've got the lay of the land, where does music fit into all of this? Well, aside from the Betty Farmer, Ryan Adams, Mark Wahlberg, Anthrax, and Michael Jackson references, an awful lot. For starters, the events of that day literally changed some albums. Dream Theater changed the cover art to their new album, as did Bush. Sheryl Crow decided not to release a song about having a lack of heroes. Dave Matthews changed their next single release from When the World Ends to Every Day. The Strokes removed the anti-police brutality song New York City Cops from the CD release of their album Is This It?, which also had been released on September 11th. A lot of songs were written about that day, from the Beastie Boys with An Open Letter to NYC, to Beyonce with I Was There, to Mary Chapin Carpenter with Grand Central Station, to 2 songs from Sheryl Crow on her album Detours. Bruce Springsteen put out an entire album about it called The Rising. Gerard Way watched the Twin Towers come down as he was riding across New York Harbor on the Staten Island Ferry. The experience of the fragility of life that day led to him following his dreams and starting his band, My Chemical Romance. On the censorship front, Clear Channel radio station companies had a list of songs that were, quote, of questionable taste, end quote, that they stopped playing. On that list were songs like Billy Joel's Only the Good Die Young, Dave Matthews Band's Crash Into Me, and every single song that Rage Against the Machine had ever put out up until that point, which the band saw as a badge of honor. Above all, music helped to heal the nation. Aside from the usual patriotic music, there were tribute concerts that were played, most notably the concert for New York, which was held not long after the attacks, which had David Bowie, The Who, among many, many others. After years of arguments between officials, realty people, and surviving family members, the World Trade Center site was revitalized with new buildings and a memorial museum and park. I have only been to the museum once and broke down in the middle of it. Also, if you go to the memorial park, please be considerate and realize that it is not a place for you to take smiling selfies. It's a cemetery, as hundreds of remains still have not been found, and is as disrespectful as a certain presidential candidate posing with a smile and a thumbs up at Arlington National Cemetery next to soldiers' graves. That's as political as I'm going to get here. No talk about the ramifications from 9/11, like the Patriot Surveillance Act or the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That is for someone else's podcast, not for this one. So that's it as far as that goes. As for what happened to me that day, well, here are my memories from living in the city, especially in that first week. When I first moved to New York in the mid-1990s, I worked for a very short while at a record store at the World Trade Center. Then I went into finance. One day in 2000, I had an interview for a finance job. That same time was a crossroads time for me, as I had also interviewed for an entertainment industry job. I was accepted for both, so I had a choice to make. Do I go with a job that would make me a ton of money, that I sort of liked, but didn't really want to do for the rest of my life? Or do I take a job that I loved, but didn't make even remotely as close to half as much money? I chose the job that I loved, and I still have, even though it paid less than the finance job. Good call, as it turned out. You see, that finance job was on one of the upper floors of the World Trade Center, where no one escaped from. On 9/11, I took the 7 train home to Flushing, Queens, where I lived at the time. And as the train turned the corner in Astoria, Queens to go to Flushing, I turned and stared at the smoke coming from Lower Manhattan. I remember walking in Manhattan during that first week in a state of utter disbelief and shock like everyone else. I have only felt that kind of silence in New York City 2 other times while living here. Maybe now 3, actually. The days when everything shut down during the COVID lockdowns in 2020, and the day after the Boston Red Sox came back and beat the New York Yankees during the 2004 playoffs. Go Red Sox! Sorry, I grew up in Massachusetts, lifelong Red Sox fan. Yeah, no. I remember Army vehicles blocking traffic going anywhere lower than 14th Street, as you couldn't go into Lower Manhattan unless you lived there. I remember the smell coming from Ground Zero. It smelled like rotten eggs and everything else that was really pungent. I'll never forget that smell for as long as I live. I remember the families of the missing lined up on 23rd Street near the Armory building, as that was the place to find out about missing loved ones. They eventually found out that only 18 people survived all the building collapses. I also remember the camera crews with reporters asking stupid questions to the relatives like, "How do you feel?" parading people's grief around for ratings. Stupid vultures. I've often looked back at that day as sort of a rebirth day in my life, so this day tends to be a pretty somber one for me, even all these years and now decades later. One little choice to pursue what I loved in reality ended up saving my life. Who knows if I would have kept the finance job long enough to be in that building that day, but knowing me, I probably would have. All I do know is that my life, along with the lives of a lot of people in the music industry and beyond, changed drastically in the days since the events that happened on September the 11th, 2001. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. Well, that was depressing. Let's pep this up a little bit. On August 1st, 1981, a TV channel that would forever change music and television began. It was MTV. And even though MTV spent the first 4 years building its reputation as a pop culture influencer, by the time 1984 rolled around, it had rightfully earned its place in the pop culture zeitgeist as the cultural phenomenon that it had become, influencing everything from music to fashion to TV shows like Miami Vice. So, what's a cultural phenomenon to do? Well, pat itself on the back with its own award show. That's what they do. MTV came up with the MTV Video Music Awards. To be eligible, your video had to have played between May 2nd, 1983 to May 2nd, 1984. 1,500 music industry professionals decided the vast majority of the awards, with the Viewer's Choice Award being decided by a fan vote. The award that was given to the winners was a statue of a moon man, a nod to its opening montage at the beginning of every hour of its programming at that time. The network got veteran sports television producer Don Ohlmeyer to produce the show, along with MTV Channel CEO Bob Pittman and producer Ed Griles, who directed the show. Cyndi Lauper was the most nominated artist that night, with 9 nominations, 6 for Girls Just Want to Have Fun and 3 for Time After Time. Jazz artist Herbie Hancock's music video for his song Rocket, which combined hip-hop and jazz, along with the iconic music video for the Police's song Every Breath You Take, each received 8 nominations. ZZ Top had 6 nominations from 3 different videos: Sharp Dressed Man, Legs, and Gimme All Your Lovin'. Michael Jackson had 6 nominations for Thriller, and The Cars had 6 nominations for You Might Think. Billy Idol had 5 nominations for Dancing with Myself and Eyes Without a Face. David Bowie had 4 nominations for China Girl and Modern Love. The Video of the Year nominees that year were Herbie Hancock's Rocket, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun, The Police's Every Breath You Take, and The Cars' You Might Think. Who won? Well, I'll tell you in a couple minutes. I will tell you right now that Herbie Hancock was the big winner of the night, as Rocket won 5 awards, while Michael Jackson won 3 awards for Thriller. On September 14th, 1984, the very first MTV Video Music Awards ceremony was held. The ceremony was held at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. Mayor Ed Koch, who was the first presenter that night, proclaimed Radio City Music Hall to be renamed Video City Music Hall for that night. Clever. Then he introduced hosts Dan Aykroyd and Bette Midler, who spent their monologue trying to act cool by telling risque jokes. Sure, why not? Then there were a bunch of performances that night. Rod Stewart started it off with his song Infatuation. There were also performances by Huey Lewis and the News performing I Want a New Drug, David Bowie doing a pre-tape performance of Blue Jean from London, England, Tina Turner doing What's Love Got to Do With It, ZZ Top performing Sharp Dressed Man, and Ray Parker Jr. performing Ghostbusters, which was one of the big summer movies that year. However, there was one performance that ruled them all, both in terms of turning this artist into a superstar and in terms of shock value. Well, at least at that time. Madonna was the second performance of the evening. She was scheduled to do the title track from her brand new album, Like a Virgin. Madonna popped out of a 17-foot-tall wedding cake in a see-through wedding dress with her now famous boy toy belt and bustier and started performing. As she started, she suffered her first wardrobe malfunction as her shoe came off while she was coming down the stairs off of the cake. At that point, rather than run after the shoe, she quickly decided to make it part of the act and started twisting around on stage rather seductively, trying to get the shoe. As she did that, she accidentally created wardrobe malfunction number 2 by flashing her underwear at the TV audience. As she said in an interview in 2014, quote, "So I thought, well, I'll just pretend I meant to do this, and I dove onto the floor and I rolled around. And as I reached for the shoe, the dress went up, and the underpants were showing." End quote. The audience was stone cold quiet, not sure what to make of any of this. The conservatives in the country were up in arms. They'd get used to that feeling when it came to Madonna. Kids like me fell in love with her, and Madonna Mania was officially born that night. All 5 of the MTV VJs made appearances during the show. J.J. Jackson appeared in a backstage segment before a commercial break. Alan Hunter appeared in a segment from the mezzanine level after a commercial break. John Cougar Mellencamp was interviewed by Mark Goodman from his seat before a commercial break. David Lee Roth was interviewed by Martha Quinn, rather awkwardly, from his seat before a commercial break. And I say rather awkwardly because it was David Lee Roth who made it awkward, not Martha Quinn. And Carly Simon was interviewed by Nina Blackwood backstage before a commercial break. As far as the awards themselves went, well, here's who presented and here's who won. Cyndi Lauper read the eligibility and voting rules in some sort of weird made-up language. Roger Daltrey of The Who smashed a guitar on stage, which was usually bandmate Pete Townshend's gimmick, while presenting the award for Best Overall Performance in a Music Video, which went to Michael Jackson for Thriller. Diana Ross, incidentally, accepted all of Michael's awards that night on his behalf. Grace Slick and Mickey Thomas of Jefferson Starship, at that point simply known as Starship, presented Best New Artist in a Video, which went to Eurythmics for Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones presented Best Stage Performance in a Video, which went to Van Halen for Jump. Daryl Hall and John Oates introduced the winners of the professional categories. In those categories, Godley and Cream won Best Special Effects and Best Editing and shared Best Art Direction with Jim Whiting, all for Herbie Hancock's Rocket music video. For cinematography, that went to Daniel Pearl for The Police's Every Breath You Take. Peter Wolf of the J. Giles Band presented Best Choreography in a Music Video with ballerina Cynthia Gregory. That award went to Michael Jackson and Michael Peters for Thriller. Dale Bozzio of Missing Persons presented the Most Experimental Video. Herbie Hancock's Rocket easily won that one. Rick Ocasek of The Cars presented Best Group Video. ZZ Top won for Legs. Mick Jagger introduced the Video Vanguard Awards and its presenters, The Police, via pre-recorded video message. Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland of The Police then presented Video Vanguard Awards to the Beatles and film director Richard Lester, who had directed the Beatles films A Hard Day's Night and Help. Herbie Hancock presented another Video Vanguard Award to David Bowie. Iggy Pop accepted Bowie's awards on his behalf. Film director John Landis, who directed Michael Jackson's Thriller music video, presented Best Direction in a Video, which went to director Tim Newman for ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man. Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood, who used to be in The Faces together, presented the Special Recognition Award to Quincy Jones. Fee Waybill of The Tubes presented Best Concept Video, which went to Herbie Hancock's Rocket. Billy Idol presented the Viewer's Choice Award, which went to Michael Jackson's Thriller. Simon Le Bon and Nick Rhodes of Duran Duran presented Best Female Video. Cyndi Lauper won for Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Belinda Carlisle and Kathy Valentine of the Go-Go's presented Best Male Video. David Bowie won for China Girl. Iggy Pop accepted that award on Bowie's behalf. Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo, the dynamic duo of Saturday Night Live that year, presented Video of the Year. You might think that Thriller won that one. You might think that Rocket won that one. You would be wrong. With their only video award win of the evening, the Cars, you might think, took home the top prize, making it one of the only times that a Video of the Year winner didn't win another award at the ceremony. The very first MTV Video Music Awards was held on September 14th, 1984. Normally, I would use this spot to celebrate a birthday or two. Instead, I'm going to celebrate a date, September the 13th. The 13th had a lot of very important things happen on it. Let us start in the world of hip-hop, for instance. On the night of September 7th, 1996, Quincy Jones and actress Peggy Lipton's daughter, Kadeta Jones, waited for rapper Tupac Shakur in a Las Vegas hotel room. Kadeta was Tupac's fiancée at the time. Tupac and his record label owner, Suge Knight, were at the Mike Tyson heavyweight boxing match. After the match, as they walked through the MGM Grand Hotel, someone in their entourage spotted a member of the Crips street gang. A fight broke out in the hotel. Pac and Knight left the hotel and drove off and headed towards the club 662, which was owned by Suge. They were stopped by the cops for not having license plates on the car, which Suge was driving. They were later let go without a license, as the plates were in the trunk of the car. After a minute or two, they stopped at a stoplight at the corner of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. As they waited for the light to turn green, a white Cadillac pulled up next to them. Shots were fired from the Cadillac, hitting Tupac in the chest, leg, and arm. Suge was hit by shrapnel. Tupac was taken to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead on September 13th, 1996, from his gunshot wounds. His alleged killer was finally arrested nearly 30 years later, as they arrested former gang member Dwayne Keith Davis for Tupac's murder in 2023. Precisely 2 years earlier, in 1994, Tupac's rival, the Notorious B.I.G., released his album Ready to Die, considered one of the greatest hip-hop albums ever made. In 1988, Eazy-E released his album Easy Does It, on September the 13th, by the way. Also on September 13th, 1980, a really cheesy hour-long TV show called Solid Gold debuted. The show was a countdown show that had performances on it, and the show had different hosts over the years, including Arsenio Hall, Dionne Warwick, who was the very first host, Marilyn McCoo, Andy Gibb, radio DJ Rick Dees, Rex Smith, Waylon Flowers of Waylon and Madam, Jeff Altman, Lucinda Dickey, and MTV VJ Nina Blackwood. The show was mainly known for a group of people known as the Solid Gold Dancers. Every song they'd dance around in spandex. Gold, of course. It was the 80s in all its glorious cheesiness. Google the videos and enjoy them. You're welcome. The show ran for 8 years and won a Primetime Emmy Award. Okay, it was for outstanding lighting direction, but still a Primetime Emmy Award-winning show with those fabulous Solid Gold dancers. Ah, yeah. In the 1960s, a couple of rock traditions happened on September the 13th. For instance, in 1965, the Beatles released what would become the most played or overplayed song on the radio, depending on how you look at it, the song Yesterday. In 1969, the Plastic Ono Band debuted on stage at a music festival in Toronto, Canada. However, the tradition that came out of it was when the festival's host, Kim Fowley, asked the audience to hold up and light their cigarette lighters. And that tradition kept going right up until cell phones. On September the 13th of 1814, the Battle of Fort McHenry took place. It would inspire a witness to the attack, Francis Scott Key, to write the Star-Spangled Banner, which would, of course, become the American national anthem. In less patriotic news, on September the 13th, 2009, Kanye West interrupted Taylor Swift's acceptance speech at the MTV Video Music Awards. I'm going to let you finish, but yeah. So, here's to you, September the 13th. To future September 13ths, you have some tough acts to follow. Good luck with it. There is one other event that happened that had a huge effect on pop culture in the 1980s, but did not happen on September 13th. On Sunday night, September 16th, 1984, at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, NBC ran the 2-hour pilot of a TV cop show. The popular myth is that NBC programming head Brandon Tartikoff wrote the words MTV Cops on a napkin during a brainstorming session for new TV shows. He presented the idea to writer Anthony Yerkovich, who wrote and produced the TV show Hill Street Blues, and also to producer Michael Mann. Yerkovich wrote the pilot episode and called the show Gold Coast, then changed it to what it became, Miami Vice. Yerkovich, however, has said that he was the one who came up with the idea of the show from a newspaper article about Miami crime. Yerkovich was obsessed with Miami. The city at the time was experiencing a lot of violent crime and wealth, as it had become the cocaine capital of America in the 1980s. The show also caught hell for its use of violence in every episode. However, it was really depicting the Miami cocaine wars. There was not exactly a lot of nonviolence in those. That same criticism was also leveled at a movie about a Miami crime lord that came out the year before in 1983, the Brian De Palma movie Scarface, starring Al Pacino, with the screenplay written by Oliver Stone with some of the most iconic lines in movie history. You want to play? Okay, we play. Say hello to my little friend, etc., etc., etc. Love that movie. Oh, such a great screenplay. Anyway, Yerkovich focused the show on the Miami Vice Squad and the frustration that they felt taking down drug dealers and cartel members, only to have more take their place. The show cast Don Johnson as Detective Sonny Crockett and Philip Michael Thomas as Ricardo Tubbs. Johnson was not the first choice for the role, though, as he had a reputation at the time after being casted in 5 other shows that never made it past the pilot episodes. Nick Nolte and Jeff Bridges were actually each offered the role, but turned it down because they wanted to do more films. Plus, actors doing television were not looked at as being serious actors back in the day. Actors really wanted to do movies or absolutely nothing. The stigma about doing television didn't change for decades when Holly Hunter and Kira Sedgwick did gritty TV series for cable television like TNT. Then everybody started doing shows on HBO like The Sopranos and The Wire, and suddenly every actor saw the potential of doing serious television shows. In the end, the role of Sonny Crockett came down to Don Johnson, Gary Cole, and Larry Wilcox, who had been on the 70s TV show Chips. Johnson eventually won the role. The show was a bit of a slow burn. It started out okay in the ratings, but not great in 1984. In the spring of 1985, though, it suddenly, for some reason, caught fire. By the time its second season premiered in September of 1985, it was a cultural phenomenon. There were many parts of it that helped make it define the 1980s. The first was its use of colors. The show borrowed its looks from Miami's South Beach area with its pastel color themes. Neon pink and blue might have been a thing before Miami Vice, but it was maybe for an occasional music video or two. After Miami Vice, pastels and neon colors were everywhere. The show expertly created a style all its own. It became fashionable to have 5 o'clock shadow, wear suits with white t-shirts and shoes with no socks, basically the Italian Armani look at the time. It made drug dealers look very glamorous with nice boats, mansions, and especially cars. By the way, the black Ferrari in the first 2 seasons was actually a replica built over a Chevy Corvette. Ferrari sued for trademark infringement, but settled the lawsuit before season 3 and even did a little product placement by giving the show a couple of white Ferraris to use. So when you see the black one being blown up at the beginning of season 3, you now know why that happened. It also started the current tourism and party town boom of the past 30 or so years, which is kind of strange when you consider that they were portraying the city as an extremely violent place. In fact, the city hated the show until the city government saw that it was bringing in a lot of money into the city, which they used to help fix up certain areas. Miami Vice was affected by and helped to affect music. The show spent over $10,000 per episode just on buying up music rights to the songs to play on the show, which was part of their $1.3 million per episode budget, which back in the 80s was an awful lot of money. From the pilot episode with the iconic nighttime drive scene to get Bad Guy Calderone while Phil Collins' hit song In the Air Tonight played in the background, the show incorporated that MTV video montage feel. In fact, In the Air Tonight is now synonymous with the show. Phil Collins showed up on the show playing a con man called Phil the Shill. Other musicians acted on the show as well, like Miles Davis, Sheena Easton, Little Richard, James Brown, Gloria Estefan, Gene Simmons, Willie Nelson, Frank Zappa, and Glenn Frey, whose song Smuggler's Blues became an entire episode on season 1. Musician and composer Jan Hammer's soundtrack helped to anchor the show. People loved the music so much that the show put out 2 soundtrack albums. The first one spent 11 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Albums chart in 1985, while Jan Hammer's theme song for the show hit number 1 on the singles chart. The soundtrack album became the biggest selling TV soundtrack album of all time until High School Musical took care of that little record. Along with musicians acting, the show attracted heavyweight actors like Pam Grier, Brian Dennehy, and Eartha Kitt. The laundry list of actors on the show who were unknown at the time they got on the show is extremely long. Everyone from Bruce Willis, Chris Rock, Ben Stiller, Liam Neeson, Stanley Tucci, Jimmy Smits, who played Crockett's first partner for maybe the first 15 minutes of the pilot episode before he got blown up in a car bombing. Wesley Snipes, Lou Diamond Phillips, Ed O'Neill, Julia Roberts, and the list goes on and on and on. And it is really a long list of people who started off on Miami Vice before they got big. Miami Vice set a trend. The network didn't have much faith in the show because they put it in one of the worst time slots on television at that time. Friday nights at 10 p.m. when everyone is going out to the clubs or wherever. What happened was that people started delaying going out until 11 p.m. so that they could stay home and watch the show. Remember, this was way before computers and streaming services and all that. If you missed a show, you missed the show, unless you could catch it in reruns if you were so lucky. Once the show got hot, everyone started copying the styles. Copycat TV shows started to show up but failed miserably because they didn't get the concept that Miami Vice was going for. These copycat shows figured that all they had to do was play some popular music in the background during the scenes or maybe do some music video montage edits and you had Miami Vice. Vice was much more than that, and it was certainly more than good editing. It was great acting with a style all its own. It couldn't be copied. When you think about the look and feel of the 1980s, if you're not thinking about Michael Jackson's Thriller jacket or big hairband hair or big shoulder pads, you're probably thinking about pink and blue neon, guys in Armani suits with t-shirts and with Ray-Ban sunglasses and 5-day-old stubble. Without even knowing it, you're thinking about the style put forth by Miami Vice. It defined the style of the mid to late 1980s, and even though the show ran for 5 seasons, it was really the first 2 seasons that set it apart from everything else and started all the trends. The pilot episode of Miami Vice, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sunday, September 16th, 1984. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for September 11th through the 17th. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you are watching on YouTube or Spotify.